It's 38 minutes past 7. You're watching Breakfast from BBC News, and it's an illness which is said to affect more than 1 in 5 of us at some point in our lives. But getting the right medication for depression can be a long process of trial and error, with only half of patients responding well to the first drug they're prescribed.
Now scientists say they have devised a simple blood test which can accurately predict which antidepressants will work best for individuals.
Here to explain a bit more is GP Dr Rangan Chatterjee and also Dina Dahabir, to talk about exactly how this has affected you as well. Dr Rangan, if we can come to you to first up, what do you make of these findings of this research?
I think this research is really interesting and helps us understand a new era I think we're going to enter of more personalised medicine. I think one thing that frustrates myself and many of my GP colleagues is that many of our patients don't respond to antidepressants, and what this research is suggesting is that it can help determine why that might be, which patients will respond, and more importantly, which patients won't respond, because often we're giving antidepressants to people who actually won't actually respond to them, and this blood test is helping at an early stage. It's helping us determine why that may be.
And it sort of has a big impact on timings, Dina, doesn't it? You've tried how many different drugs? Is it 8 over the last 6 years?
Yeah, I've tried 8 different drugs over the last 6 years.
And do any of them make a difference as far as you've found?
Yeah, I mean, in the first 2 years it was completely trial and error, and that's where the majority were tried. In the last 4 years I have been on a drug that's been really successful, but only most recently, because due to side effects, I've had to change again 3 weeks ago.
And that's very, what's the impact on you on waiting for things to find out whether they work? What impact does it have?
I think in the early days it was really hard. Every time you were on a new drug, you really thought that this was the one, you were given hope. You have to wait 3 months, which when you're going through something like depression, borderline personality disorder, is a long time. Every day seems like a long day. And when they don't work, I think that's when everything starts to crash even more.
Listening to Dina talking about the situation that she's been through there, it's almost part of the problem in a way, isn't it?
It's a big part of the problem. I think it's important to understand what this blood test is, because I think it helps us re-examine how we think about depression. It's basically looking at inflammation in the body. It's saying that if you've got high levels of inflammation, you're not going to respond to antidepressants. So therefore, those people, in many ways, we may be wasting our time and their time and all that suffering that patients have to go through by putting them on antidepressants. We need to think of ways to tackle the inflammation. But I think for the viewer, it's really important to think about, well, inflammation, what is that? You know, and why would that be associated with depression? Well, the reason is because acute inflammation, so that's short-term inflammation, let's say you sprain your ankle or you cut your hand, that's really important, but that resolves in a couple of days, it's self-limiting. The inflammation that these researchers are measuring is what's called chronic inflammation. It's when the triggers for that inflammation are long-term, and they drive many different diseases, not only depression. One of the markers in that blood test is called IL-1 beta. Now, we don't know about that so much, but what's interesting is that that marker, when it's elevated, it's also elevated in obesity, in type 2 diabetes. So instead of saying depression is a disease, we're saying, well, actually, maybe depression is a symptom of problems that are going on in your body with some patients, not in all patients. And so maybe we should look at strategies to manage that inflammation rather than jumping to using a drug for those patients.
Yes. What difference, even hearing that, does that make to you? That it might actually be something to do with your blood, for example?
I think definitely it makes a difference, especially now as I'm on a new drug, and at the moment I'm in limbo. I'm still back in that stage. Will it work? Will it not work?
Yeah.
I think had this drug been around in 2010 when I was going through all these trial and errors, it probably would have given me more hope and reduced the amount of time I was in and out of hospital, and probably for others going through mental health problems.
What's been the most helpful for you, apart from the drugs, which did, you say you eventually found one that did work? What has been the most helpful in making a difference to how you've been?
So I went through a treatment. I was very lucky that my support team put me through a treatment called dialectical behavioural therapy,
right.
DBT, and that was probably the most effective in giving me the coping strategies that I have to use every day now. It's not just drug therapy that's going to work. So
yeah, and I think long term, fewer people taking antidepressants is a really good thing, isn't it?
Very much so. First of all, it's important to realise that they're very commonly prescribed, but the side effects are potentially very serious. You know, they range from simple things like nausea and gut problems to actually increasing your risk of suicide. so it's very important we don't put people who are not going to respond to them on those drugs. But what was really interesting about the therapy that you're talking about is what drives this inflammation that we're measuring. A lot of the time it's things like your diet, so a Western diet, high in sugars, low in helpful fats, that can drive inflammation. Okay. Psychosocial stresses, things in your personal life, in your work life, that can drive this inflammation. Lack of exercise, obesity, all these kinds of things, lack of sleep. And maybe if we're saying that there's a subset of patients who've got high levels of inflammation, maybe we should look at these lifestyle and nutrition factors first before jumping to some quite harmful drugs.